Morning, everybody. This is Pastor John with another edition of Monday Morning Quarterback. So yesterday we concluded our sermon series, What the? And we were talking about some statements that Jesus made that really might cause the listener to say, what the? When they heard them. Statements like Jesus calling someone to follow them and then them saying, Lord, let me first go and bury my father, which would have been a perfectly reasonable and a perfectly honorable request for a first century Jew to make. And then Jesus' response is, let the dead bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. And then someone says, I will follow you, but let me first say farewell to those at my home. And Jesus' response is even more pointed. He says, no one who puts a hand to the plow looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. So what Jesus is essentially saying here is that he does not want to be only our first allegiance. He wants our allegiance to him to define all of our other allegiances. So he wants us to be more faithful to him than faithful to our family, more faithful to him than faithful to our church, more faithful to him than faithful to the institutions of our society. This is a stark word, not stark necessarily, but harsh word that he's offering. He's really challenging the way we prioritize our lives. And sort of the statement, the theme that was running through the sermon was the idea that Jesus gave everything so that we might recognize that the kingdom of God is everything. So Jesus gave everything so that we might realize that loyalty to him is what gives life and gives meaning to all those relationships that we have in our lives. Jesus is not saying, don't love your parents, or like he does say elsewhere in the Gospels. I'll talk about that another day. But he's not saying that here. But what he is saying is your loyalty must pale in comparison to your loyalty to me. So we're sort of forced to wonder, why is it so dramatic? Why is it so serious? Well, Jesus understands that the world in which we live, first of all, continuously calls us, to be loyal to it through advertising, for us today, or through, politics, or through the church even. There are so many things pulling for our allegiance, pulling for our heart, pulling for our loyalty. But Jesus knows that the only way that we would be able to get through that morass of distractions is to be single-mindedly focused on him and on his kingdom. Now, Jesus knows this, and this was true in Jesus' day. It's just as true in our day, maybe not as obvious. But today, especially here in America, we live under an illusion that, for example, we live under the illusion that our nation is a Christian nation, that Christian values govern things that we do. And that's just not true. Never mind for a second the low-hanging fruit of saying, when you have a president that, literally laughs in the face of Jesus' commandment to love God and love our neighbor every day of his administration, all the while invoking the name Christian. That's not a Christian nation. If you can call yourself a Christian, but act complete polar opposite to what Jesus' values are, and people just say, oh yeah, that's it, that's what Christianity is, that's not a Christian nation. But beyond that, like I said, that was a low-hanging fruit. That was an easy example. The more subtle stuff that we all face every day is the fact, for example, that we live in a nation governed by the law of commerce. It's not governed by the law of love. It's money that moves our nation. And those are values that are in direct contradiction to the values of the kingdom of God. Love of God, love of neighbor animates the kingdom of God. The profit and loss animates the American life. And whether we are titans of industry or just cogs in the machine, we are all consumed by that quest to have more, to get more, to save more, to do whatever for ourselves. Well, that's not Christian. We can call ourselves Christian. We can go to church every Sunday and do nice things, and maybe even occasionally, throw a little bone to some worthy organizations. But if our heart is set on ourselves, we are not truly living into our Christian calling. And that's what Jesus is trying to say. You see, Jesus knows that the world that we live in, both in his day and in ours, pulls us toward values that are contrary to his kingdom every day. And so he must say in very stark terms where our loyalties should lie. Because if he doesn't, we may never get it. We may never understand. Jesus basically holds up, forgive the cliche, he holds up a mirror to society. He says, this is the world in which you live, where success is defined by how big your house is, how many cars you have, what kind of school your kids go to, all these things that we think are really good things. And they're not bad things in and of themselves. I want to be very clear on that. I have a house. I, have a wonderful wife, and we each have cars, and our son has a car. I'm not saying those are bad things in and of themselves, but when that becomes the main pursuit of our life, and that's how we define success or failure in our life, then that's a problem for Jesus. It is. Because for him, the way we define success is by whether we love God, whether we love our neighbor. And remember, our neighbor to Jesus can even be our most bitter enemy. So, how we doing, America? How we doing? No one that puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Lord, in your mercy, make us fit for your kingdom. Have a wonderful week, my friends. God bless.